Show me your incentive and I'll show you the outcome. I've been hearing this over and over again recently, and I think it might resonate with our conversation today on collaboration. So welcome everybody to the November 2003 Community Commons Impact Makers Gathering. I'm Rhonda Bannard. I'm the Executive Director of Earth Gives, and I'm thrilled to have Renee Myers here with us to lead this important conversation. She is one of those leaders that caught my attention early on as we were shaping Earth Gives, which we're still shaping. But because I saw her intentionality when it came to building true community and being inclusive in the process of doing so, as she was leading the Forest Park Conservancy in Oregon, and now she's on to other projects, which I'm sure she'll give us a glimpse into as we go through this. But before we turn it over to Renee to talk about collaboration, I would love you all to introduce yourselves, what state you're coming in from, maybe a project or initiative that you're working on that brought you to be interested in this topic of collaboration. So Elizabeth, why don't we start with you?
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth. I'm calling in from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I am the sponsorship and outreach manager at Bubbler Bikes, which is Milwaukee's nonprofit bike share. A lot of cities have bike shares like New York, Chicago, Milwaukee. Most of them are owned by a parent company like Lyft or Uber. So Bubbler's pretty unique that it's a nonprofit. In terms of collaboration and what we have going on right now, we're doing a big winter fundraiser with a bunch of local Milwaukee businesses where they donated gift cards to us, and we're doing a silent auction on our website. People can bid on those gift cards. So we very much value community at Bubbler Bikes, and I think that's kind of what we're doing right now. As you know, it's snowing and we're bringing in the bikes to keep leveraging that. So I'm very happy to be here.
Nice to have you. Betty.
Hi, my name's Betty Roth. I live in Chandler, Arizona. I work with Third Act Arizona on the coordinating committee, and my section of it is voting and elections. So I'm really here to try to figure out what we can do with minority communities to help them, especially concerning the vote coming up in 2024. So I just have my ears open, trying to look for activities that I can involve our volunteers in.
Great to have you. Well, why don't we go to the other Third Act Arizona folks, Kurt and Barb.
Good morning. Barb and I actually are in Eugene, Oregon right now. We lived there half the year, but we'll be heading back to our home in Arizona in Tucson in a couple of weeks. And, Third Act is involved in climate and democracy issues, and we have campaigns going on in fossil-free finance kinds of advocacy, utility commission kinds of things, and as Betty Roth's involved in with voting and elections. So, and we're very interested in collaboration. So,
great to have you, Tim.
Thanks, Rhonda. I'm Tim Eskew. I'm located in Tempe, Arizona, and I've been volunteering with a group called Reap Goodness for about 2.5 years, and we are at the early stages of creating an agroforest in a food desert area outside of the Phoenix metropolitan area in a place called the Copper Corridor. And so, we're at that stage, and we want it to be a very, we're not bringing in an expert to tell us how to do it. We're going to use the resources that are out there and do it collaboratively with folks from the community. And we're just getting started, so I'm really excited to hear what we can learn today. And can I make a shameless plug? My new podcast is coming out today. It's called Mind and Body at Work. And if anybody cares to check it out, I'll put it in the name in the chat. It'll be at several of the places where you get your podcasts.
And Tim is a systems geek that came out of Intel, and now he's blending incredible volunteer work and Tai Chi and leadership and all kinds of cool stuff. So it's great to have him. Leah.
Hi, everyone. And my name is spelled Leah, but I usually pronounce it Leia. So I'm Leah Lawson, and I'm from Organic Farming Research Foundation. We are a national organization, but I am in Chicago, Illinois. We have staff all over the country from coast to coast, which is lovely. And we work in research, education, and advocacy for organic agriculture. All of our work is very science-backed, and we focus a lot on the climate aspects of, why organic agriculture is better for the environment. And I'm really interested, like my position with this organization is new. I come more previously from farmer training here in Northern Illinois. And so I'm, coming to this national stage and working on, more of these political things is still a little new for me, but I'm looking for new and different ways of collaboration and, just trying to figure out, I feel like there's been a lot of shifts in the last few years and just trying to make connections and figure out new ways.
That's great.
That's it.
Great to have you, Leah. We'll have to talk because I'm working on a composting initiative, so I'm sure I can get some insight from
Lovely.
you. Yeah. Donna.
Hi, I'm Donna Betzer. I am actually in New Orleans, Louisiana. I work for the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana, which is an advocacy organization about coastal restoration and preservation, because our coast is so important to the rest of the nation for energy and for seafood and what have you. So we are really a watchdog to make sure that money that is set aside for that type of work is actually put to use in that way. And we do that through a lot of educational programs and on the ground efforts. So you talked about my coworker that was an oyster shell recycling program manager. She's not able to join us yet, but her role is to recycle oyster shells and then put them back in the water to create shoreline protection and wildlife habitat. Those types of activities bring people to the issues. And so, but when we do those types of activities, we like to really be involved with the community. So we work with a lot of indigenous communities and I was hoping through this effort, learn how to make sure that we're inclusive in decision-making for the projects that we're doing on the coast, not just necessarily bringing the projects to the communities, but be more inclusive. So I thought I'd learn something today.
Thanks for joining, Donna. Chally, am I pronouncing your name right?
Really, really close. So my name is Chally Facemeyer, and I apologize for not having video. I'm on my phone at the moment, and I didn't want to make anybody sick when I'm moving around. So I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, and I run the Central Arizona Conservation Alliance, which is an initiative of the Desert Botanical Garden here. And so we're a giant collaboration, and CASGA, as we call it, is a convener of partner organizations to tackle large and small conservation projects. And a lot of what we do is through working groups, so slightly smaller collaborations, a part of the larger one. So super excited to be here and to meet you all and looking forward to this.
Great to have you. I just saw the exec, Ken, right? Ken.
Oh, yeah.
2 nights ago, I think it was. Yeah. So great to have you. Longtime member. Carol.
Hi, I'm here, but Tim already covered everything. I'm not coming on camera because of the connection is very poor right now. But we're doing some work here in Sierra Vista. Tim is doing work over at the Boyce Thompson Arboretum, and we're doing food forestry and trying to develop the opportunity to create training for upper primary schools around the world in food forestry and conservation and so on, water conservation especially. But that's it. He covered most of it, and we're ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, doing great work. Thanks, Carol. Renee, I guess this is our time to shift it to you and take it over. She does have a presentation, so lovely to have you, and thanks for sharing your 25 plus years of wisdom with us on collaboration.
Well, I don't know about wisdom, but I'm really excited to be here, and thanks everybody for joining today. Yeah, my name is Renee Myers, and I've been doing this work since I was yeah, 20 years old. So 28 years, that kind of ages me a little bit. Um, but yeah, I've been working in conservation basically my entire career. I'll show some slides because I think it's important to kind of show why I love the environment, why I love conservation, and I think collaboration as a whole. Yeah, so I've been doing this work for a long time. I started my career as a hydrologist for the Department of Natural Resources in Missoula, Montana, and then was able to kind of transition into nonprofits. And so I've been working as an executive director for over 15 years. And now I stepped out of that role and I'm the conservation director for the Wild Rivers Land Trust, which is down here in Port Orford, Coos Bay. And we help protect 2.5 million acres on the Oregon coast and trying to protect working lands and wild spaces and keeping them abundant and healthy. So I'm excited to get back to my roots. And I showed this because I think I grew up on a farm in upstate New York. So I'm a rural country girl at heart. But it really kind of forged kind of a lot of things in my mind that, how do we better the world, better the environment, serve our communities um, together. Because I think in this world right now, there's so many different polarized groups that in the end are really wanting the same outcomes, but they have a hard time, finding their common goals and values and bringing them together. And one of my passions and things I love to do is to bring groups together and how do we kind of find these shared values and common goals and work together to have more of a collective impact because the future needs that. I think especially since COVID, so many people behind screens and we've kind of, in my opinion, sometimes I feel like we've lost this human connection and learning how to empathize with each other and have patience and build genuine relationships with people because we've been hidden behind screens for so long. And so I think now and moving forward, collaboration becomes even more and more important for our work and to better the world and bring people together to really have an impact, especially when we think about climate change and making our communities and our ecosystems more resilient. One organization and one person can't do that alone. It really takes all of us together building community to have that greater impact. And so hopefully what I'm sharing today, you all don't know, or if you do, maybe it's a little something new, but I'm also really excited to hear some questions and hear about your work because again, collaboration is about learning and sharing information with each other. And I love to learn from others. So hopefully I'll learn today from you all. So yeah, I love this picture because I think it's when I think about my kids and I think about the future and the different ways that, we communicate and we connect. And so this picture always reminds me of that. So to me, I feel like collaboration, it's inspiring and it's infectious. And people, I think, tend to notice impact lots of times more than others when you have these kind of collective groups and you have collaboration working together because their impact is so much greater. And when I was working as an executive director for the Forest Park Conservancy in Portland, one of the first things I did when I took over that position was to develop a large landscape conservation initiative that was based on collaboration. And through that process, we brought multiple different kinds of community groups together. We had state government, federal government, all the different, city bureaus, we had nonprofits, and then we also had our, neighborhood associations all working together to protect and restore over 15,000 acres of urban habitat, both public and private land. And it was through that process that it got noticed by the then ambassador to Malaysia. And so we were invited over to Borneo to share our work about collaborative conservation and help guide some of their conservation groups and federal agencies over there on how to do this work. So it's really, I think this work gets noticed on a broader level because the impact is so much greater. Just gonna move my little, there we go. So a lot of people ask me, like, why is collaboration so important? And, as an organization, we're doing really well. What is the importance and, what is it going to do to build these partnerships? Because building good collaborative efforts, it takes a lot of time and it takes building relationships and patience, and really understanding not just your own organization and what your mission is and your focus, but also others. And how do you bring those two things together? How do you find those common values, those goals? But number one is the impact. By collaborating and supporting each other's strengths and common goals and values, we have a greater collective impact. And that's what we're really after, is how do we do more together? And then it also allows you to build community. When your collaboration allows you to kind of not just build that community, but it also builds trust and it builds bridges to sometimes unlikely partners. And I go back to some of the work that I did in Montana because I was working with very conservative private agricultural landowners and having to bring them together with EPA and DEQ, to do restoration on private agricultural land. And at first, it was very difficult because you had very polarized groups with very different views, butting heads a lot. But through that process, helping each of these groups to kind of step in each other's shoes and then kind of find those common goals and objectives, we were able to get some really good work done. But again, it really takes time to build those relationships, showing up, and making it happen. So building community, I think, there's just so much value in that. Um, and then resources, especially when we think about the need for a lot of your programs and the things that you do to serve your community, those needs are increasing. But the resources to be able to fund those things, I feel like lots of times are shrinking. And so when we do collaborative fundraising and we work together to not only raise dollars, but with those dollars, we can have a broader impact. And a lot of the foundations and the trusts that I've talked to over the past how many years are really looking to fund collaborative efforts because they want to see people sharing resources, not just funding resources, but also staffing resources and bringing different groups together. Even just in the past year, I think there's 3 grants that I've written, or maybe 4, that it was a requirement. You had to have 3 or more partners, that you were collaborating with in order to even apply for funding. So there's also a lot of value, when you work together to try to raise dollars for the programs that are obviously increasing today. And building rapport. When you build rapport with community partners, it creates this amazing necessary foundation to continue building relationships with others. And some of that, I'll give an example. About 8 or 9 years ago, we as an organization really kind of took the deep dive into looking at diversity, equity, inclusion, and how do we work internally within our own culture to be able to have an inclusive, space where historically marginalized communities would actually want to come and not just work with us, internally, but then how do we do that work to shape the culture so that we can then go out and build partnerships because we've done the work internally. And so I think when you're building that rapport and you're doing kind of that internal work, word travels, right? And so when we had that rapport and we started building community and relationship with a lot of other BIPOC-led community organizations, it was like all of a sudden we were able to work with a lot other more community organizations, because we had the rapport. And so it's just, I think it's a really important thing. And then the story, you have to, especially as a nonprofit, like how do you tell your story? We need to be sharing the work that we're doing and not just our work, but sharing the impact of our other partners. And that was one thing that I learned, during this big conservation initiative that we were leading was it's not just about our story, it's about their story. And so how do we also highlight our partners' work and not just our work? And it seemed to go not just a long way with our partners, but with our funders as well and the communities that we were all serving. So these are just a few things that, kind of I call them the why of why we do collaborative work. And if anyone has a question or anything, I don't know if we're taking them now or at the end. But if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask as I'm going along. So here are just some other, I think, really key practices and things to kind of keep in mind as you're building collaborative efforts and you're building relationships, is really knowing your mission. And I feel like there's a lot of organizations that sometimes go after funding and build programs just for funding. And then they become an organization where you kind of look at them and you're like, what exactly is your mission? Because you're doing so many different things. I have no idea like what you're focusing on or what your mission is. So I think when we step into these collaborative spaces, is having a really good idea and knowing, being very clear about what your mission is and what your focus is, especially when it comes to collaboration, because each partner has a different, role and responsibility, and they each bring something different to the table. So I think stepping into that space, knowing your own mission and focus is really important to building partnerships that complement that. And the other is patience. I keep saying this over and over because patience, it really takes time to build genuine relationships that are built on trust. And those are things that can't be rushed, especially to be honest, with if you're a historically white organization and you're building partnerships and relationships with BIPOC and historically marginalized community organizations, it takes showing up time after time. And I can't say that enough, is showing up all the time to build those relationships. And it's not just showing up when you have a meeting or you're trying to collaborate. It's showing up to their community, showing up to events, showing that you actually care. I think that's a really huge piece that gets forgotten and lost, because that's what a true partnership is, and that's what support is. It's not just supporting the collaboration, like when you're together, but it's supporting their mission and their community and what they do. And so I'll keep saying that because you have to show up. It's really, really important. The other piece, when I was talking before about kind of like internal culture and preparing your organization as a whole for this work, you have to have a collaborative spirit from the inside and out. So it's from individuals in the organization, teams, all the way from your volunteer to your board of directors. You have to have that internal collaborative spirit because it really drives everything. You can't just have one person driving collaboration. It has to really be built and institutionalized into the entire organization for it to be truly successful. The other one for me is embrace humility. You have to leave your ego at the door. We all, especially, I think sometimes directors on nonprofits, I'm a very transparent, open person. Like we all have a little bit of an ego, right? I mean, that's why we're in these positions. Like we want to do good. We want to change the world. We want to make things happen. But there's no egos in collaboration. You really have to leave your ego at the door, because the future needs leaders who desire to share, learn, collaborate, and grow together. And it's learning, when do you lead and when do you follow? And I think learning how to follow and when to follow is one of the most important things that you can do as a leader. Because there are times when we want other partners to lead and we want their voice to be out there and heard. And how do we step back and create that platform and support their work? And I think that's the beauty about collaboration, is when you build those genuine relationships and you have trust, it becomes kind of like more of this natural thing of learning when to step forward and when to step back. But I think that that's a key piece to successful collaboration, is knowing when you support and when you step back. So, and I've kind of already went, over a lot of these, just about having genuine intent. Trust is huge. Finding those common values and goals, which are sometimes really hard to find. Authenticity, always be authentic. I think bringing who you are and your whole self, and being really transparent and upfront from the beginning of these collaborative processes and building relationships goes a really long way. And I know it's not always easy, but it's necessary. And I talked a little bit about institutionalizing the partnership, even as far as like the collaborative spirit. But the other thing that's really, really important when it comes to collaboration is lots of times you'll have one person kind of leading, a partnership or, collaborative effort. But for that collaboration to continue to have an impact over time and to keep partners engaged, you have to institutionalize the partnership within the organization. Because what lots of times happens is, oh, there's one person in this position and they move on to a different organization or a different job. And then that relationship goes with that person. And then you lose the collaboration, momentum, the partnerships. So you have to really institutionalize these partnerships, put them in your strategic plan, make sure that teams are involved in the collaboration. So you want that to be institutionalized so that your board of directors knows who your partners are, so that when positions transition out, that relationship and that collaboration is within the organization, not just one person, because it's really easy to lose momentum and partners if it's not institutionalized. The other one is diverse voices and perspectives. To me, that is a must-have. Everyone brings a unique voice and different perspectives. And especially when you're working with diverse communities, you have to have folks at the table that represent that community because they know their community, they know their culture, and they need to be at the table and they need to have decision-making power as part of that collaboration. So that takes time to build those partnerships and have those voices at the table. But I don't know how many times, especially in the environmental nonprofit world, I've walked into a room and there's 50 folks there and only 2 are from historically marginalized communities or BIPOC community organizations. And that needs to shift and it needs to be flipped on its head. But the only way to do that is through all of you working together to change that shift. Because one of the things that I always thought about, and we institutionalized within our organization at Forest Park Conservancy, was that we want to resemble the changing demographics over time because we want to be able to serve those communities well. And for us to be able to serve those communities well, our internal structure and who kind of our staff, our board, our volunteers, we needed to kind of represent that changing population. And that also takes time, but I think is really, really critical into doing good work, successful work, and actually having an impact, especially in communities of color. So really important one. I think the hardest thing with these collaborative processes, what I've learned over time is how do you maintain engagement? I mean, it's really hard when you think about some of these long-term initiatives. Partners kind of, I don't know, they kind of peter off, and it's one of the hardest things is to keep engagement. And one of the things that we found successful over lots of trial and error is making them feel like they have value in the partnership. And not just value, but they have a very specific role that they play. And highlighting their stories, like I had mentioned before, it's not just about your organization's story, it's about sharing the stories of the other organizations and people involved in the collaboration. And so, it's not just about meeting on a monthly basis, it's really about giving people tasks, making sure that roles and responsibilities are clear, and always having an action item that everyone's responsible for that you can bring back and share in that collaborative space. Because, ours was a 20-year conservation initiative. And after the first 7, 8 years, we kind of noticed partners weren't showing up as much and kind of people fall off the radar. And so we actually ended up doing, which was really, really valuable. We did a stakeholder engagement survey with all of our partners. And, you have to keep assessing these relationships and these partnerships because they change over time, and they morph. And like I said before, people leave and they take the partnership with them. And how do you kind of agree to not only institutionalize, these partnerships, but, kind of maintain that engagement? So doing this assessment was really helpful because we interviewed all of our partners, and at the time there was 13 of them, and asked for some really, really honest feedback on what do you think is going well with the partnership? What are those challenges that we have? How do we improve them? And really got input from every single partner, which was key in the future success of that entire collaborative effort. Because what we realized is we weren't engaging people in ways that they felt were meaningful, and they didn't feel like when they showed up at a meeting that they were providing value. And if you're not providing value when you show up, then why do you want to go? As you all know, we have so many meetings on our calendars, and it's like you go from meeting to meeting. And so if you're not feeling like you're having an impact or you're bringing value to that process, then you don't want to go. And so we kind of shift our whole way of kind of thinking about collaboration and how we thought about the value that people brought. And it was a game changer in the success of the conservation initiative, because we didn't realize that people weren't feeling valued or they had a role. And so I think it's really important to always kind of go back and assess your relationships and together figure out, okay, what's working, what's not working. And then, you make adaptive changes, you kind of change on the go. But asking the question, I think, is really, really important. So just kind of remember that you always have to assess those different relationships and your partnerships, because when people are busy, they're not necessarily going to tell you that. But it's like any relationship, whether it's a marriage or your children, whatever that may be, you have to foster that. And it takes a lot of communication to maintain those good relationships. And I guess that's all I have for slides right now. But the other thing I wanted to add to this, which I think is really important, is each collaboration needs either a backbone organization or a leader from each organization to be running that collaboration. We were the backbone organization, and we were the ones that set up all the meetings, did the stakeholder engagement survey. But you have to have one point person, and it's institutionalized, but you have to have someone that is willing to lead, because people need to continually be inspired and they have to feel like they have a purpose in that leadership. So whether it's an organization or it's a person, you need to have somebody that's willing to step up and kind of lead that charge, or else it kind of fizzles out. So yeah, I would love to hear from folks, questions. I know I kind of covered a lot of different things, but if folks have specific questions or stories they want to share, I'd love to hear from folks, and I will stop sharing.
This was great, Renee. Why don't we come up? Oh, good. Perfect. That's what I was hoping for. So people can just ask questions. I think it was Kurt or Barb that may have asked, people are always running after the same money or the same initiative. How much was that the question?
Well, it's sort of a question, but I find that it's still true to some degree that I do think some organizations realize that if they partner, they can do bigger things, go after bigger money. And like you said, Renee, they are looking for collaborative projects. They don't want to fund, individual projects. So I wish that more nonprofits would look at partnering. I don't think they always do. I think they talk, but they don't really collaborate on funding bigger things. You know what I mean? To solve climate issues or whatever it is. It's kind of frustrating. It's like, I just went through Giving Tuesday. Do you know how many emails we got for Giving Tuesday? I'm just saying, why don't you people get it together? And I can't give to 80 organizations, but maybe I'd fund bigger for something that you'd all get together on. That's my point.
No, I totally hear you. And I think sometimes what organizations can be hesitant because especially smaller organizations, they may not have the capacity and the staffing resources to feel like they can actually, you know, come through with like what they say they're going to do. And I think that's sometimes part, at least I know from when I've worked in smaller organizations, like, oh, wow, this is like, feels like such a big thing to kind of bite off and chew, right? And so I don't have the capacity or the staffing resources, and I don't want to, commit to something that I can't accomplish and I can't follow through with. And so I think that's kind of, how do you kind of support each other to build capacity to be able to collaborate on some more of these larger projects? Because especially with funding, when you're competing against all these different resources, just trying to keep the staff you have is tricky. And then to think about building capacity to be able to do bigger and better things can be a little bit scary. So I think one way of looking at collaboration is, how do we work together to build capacity within each other's organization so that we can do better things? And we've done a lot of different grants in the past, when I was at Forest Park Conservancy, that helped partner organizations actually build capacity and hire staff so that when we had these larger kind of collaborative efforts and we were doing more things together, they actually had those staffing resources, to feel like they could kind of follow through and make those outcomes a reality. So I hope that was helpful.
Leah, it looks like you've got a burning question. See, and your hand went up. I knew it. Go for it.
Yeah, I'm really wondering about the institutionalizing the partnerships. So I know with the last two positions that I've had, they've been with organizations that have been, pretty collaborative. But as I moved into the new position, like it took me a year to kind of figure out like what partnerships were in place. And then by the time I did figure it out, they had already gone stale. And I'm really trying to figure out like, well, how do I make that not happen in the future? Like, how do we keep that institutional knowledge?
Renee, if I can just add to that, I think I used to do a ton of events, really big events. And then when I left that nonprofit and started consulting with nonprofits, this one that I worked with used the term a cookbook. And I was like, what? And they go, yeah, we do a cookbook for our events. So it's a recipe of how you do an event. So no matter who's doing it, if the team changes from year to year, you've got a cookbook. So when Renee was talking about that very thing, I went, that's so interesting, like a recipe. So the leave behind, when there are transitions, there is a recipe for collaboration. And I had never thought about that until she was just talking about it. So good question.
Yeah, that is a great question. I think that's what a lot of organizations struggle with, is all of that knowledge is lost when a person steps out of a position. And so what can be really effective is, I call them legacy documents. So is before somebody leaves a position, you have a, it's usually like a template. We have a template, but you have a specific document where they dump all of the information that they have from their position. Who are the partnerships? What were the partnerships? What were they focused on? Who is the contact person? And then all of this information is given to the new person in the onboarding process. So as soon as your staff person is onboarded, they can hit the ground running because they know exactly who the partners are, what projects you're working on, who is the contact information. And then, as this new person is getting up and running, they know who to contact. They have some background on the project, and you can move forward. But those documents, and I love the cookbook, the recipe, that's awesome. But that is essential. Like, you really have to make sure that those are implemented within the organization, because otherwise you lose all the institutional knowledge. So yeah, I think whether it's the cookbook or the legacy documents, you have to have that information that's passed along, and then it has to be part of the onboarding process as well. And there should be other staff too that are involved in that. Like every staff meeting, you have a partnership kind of section of your staff meetings and board meetings, and you update folks on, hey, here's where we're at with this project. Here are our partners. Here's who's been working on this. And so you're kind of bringing your entire organization along as you go. And same thing with volunteers. If you're sharing the story of your newsletters, you're sharing the story of your partnerships and the things you're working on a continual basis, then you're really informing your institution from one end to the other, which I think is really important. Everyone involved in your organization should know those bigger things that you're doing and your partners, and they should be on your website. So as many places that you can kind of institutionalize these partnerships, I think it's the better. But as far as what you're talking about, I think, yeah, those documents and those cookbooks are really critical to making sure that they don't get lost. And when you come on being like, what are we doing? Like, who are our partners? Like, who's the contact person? Who do I call or email? And so it makes it such a smoother transition.
I'm writing it as you go. Elizabeth?
Yes. Hi. I had kind of a broad question. But yeah, so I work at Bubbler Bikes, which is a bike share. And like the main way that we're an environmental org is like addressing carbon emissions from the transportation sector of the world. And we've done some collaboration in the past with other Milwaukee nonprofits who also address different environmental concerns, like an urban ecology center or like our river keeper, that kind of thing. And so in the past, we've pretty much only done events to collaborate and then maybe like a newsletter or a social media campaign. So I'm still relatively new to this field. So I was just wondering if this is kind of a question for anyone, like what types of like collaborations besides just like hosting events with other organizations have worked well for you, like in this field, like just besides events. I actually wrote down an idea for like maybe a cookbook, like because you mentioned the cookbook, about like maybe we could like do something with that and like sell it and like collaborate that way. But like I don't know, I've been having a hard time coming up with new ideas in the winter because like we really need money in the winter because our ridership goes way down. So I was just wondering like what's worked in the past for you for collaboration.
You have any like specific programs that you implement that it could be really beneficial to bring other partners on that maybe bring in a different skill set that can complement a program that you're already implementing? And that way, not only, sharing funding resources, but having more capacity potentially with staff to have a more robust program. But I think even programmatically, you can bring partners in to do some collaboration on a specific program. And so if that rings a bell, I mean, I don't know as much about your organization, but if there are different programs within your organization that you could bring partners into, that would be one way to kind of dive into it. Having not just collaboration at events or like newsletter or whatever, but on a programmatic basis too.
What if you pose the question, Elizabeth? We have a challenge because of our winters in Wisconsin, and how can we be a year-round provider or instigator of, our mission and bring people from the community together to brainstorm with you?
Yeah, that's smart. And that's like the ultimate collaboration. So I like that.
Was a really, really interesting presentation. Thank you. The part about the institutionalization I found particularly resonated because we've had turnover in my position, and the program director is the one that runs CASCA with usually one other staff member, and we have the support of the full garden, but it's just the two of us. So every time that there's a new program director, it's kind of like a restart. And that can be good in that, somebody can put their own spin on it, but at the same time, it's rebuilding some of those relationships, and especially the BIPOC relationships, as you mentioned, Renee, that can be really hard because then the person that they've known and trusted has left. And so that has been a lot of my focus in my now year in this position, is rebuilding some of that trust and trying to bring in a diverse group again. We're kind of weird in that we have a host institution, but we also have a steering committee that's comprised of a bunch of different organizations. So there's a lot of push and pull with a lot of different perspectives. But it's also nice because then we get all of that buy-in for what we're doing from these people that are heavily involved in shaping the direction of the initiative. So I don't know if that helps, but
Renee, didn't you create a youth-led BIPOC sort of group or something? I feel like I'm remembering that might help her sort of think of like, even if just one leaves, you've already got like a youth group or something that stays.
Yeah, we had developed a workforce development program for BIPOC young adults from ages 18 to 28. 30, I think we changed it to, but it was a year-long program, and we hired BIPOC young adults that didn't want to take the traditional route to gain, maybe go to college. And so we wanted to provide, an alternative way to get skills and knowledge to be able to get a professional career. And so we would actually hire these young adults for an entire year, give them a salary, benefits, lots of wraparound services and support. And it was a really amazing program because we had a 95% success rate of young adults coming out of this program, either wanting to get a 4-year degree because they were really inspired, or gaining full-time employment, which was awesome. But yeah, I think for that program to be successful, we brought in partner organizations that worked with the young adults and worked with multiple staff. So we had, kind of a whole crew from each organization that was working on not just, having partners in the program, but also anytime we wanted to shift the program, we would bring the partners, like we went on a continual basis all the time, and we talked about the young adults and then how do we make them better, and like what are the challenges for maybe each individual adult that was going through, the program. But I think I just want to go back to something that you had said, because especially when you're working with BIPOC and Indigenous communities, especially, it's very relationship based, and building that trust takes a long time. But one of the things I found was that, in a program like the workforce development program, when we had several staff members and teams, like from our organization, working with a team from another organization, you had multiple people from each organization that were continually connecting and familiar with the partnership. And it wasn't just kind of a one-on-one. So that was for us critical, because when we had turnover and transition, it wasn't just one person that had the relationship with another organization. It was several people within the organization that had been working with them. And I think that was one of the key factors in maintaining those relationships, for sure. It's kind of like organization meets organization, and then you have staff building relationships with other staff. And I think that's kind of what kept these partnerships going long term, because that piece was in place and it wasn't just one person, it was multiple people. So I think that can be a good way to kind of think about it, is like an entire organization getting to know another entire organization, which I know is sometimes difficult, but it can be done.
I actually have a follow-up now, if that's okay.
Sure.
So you've actually touched on something that I have had a lot of trouble with trying to make things work around, because I want to offer internships and things like workforce development, especially to underserved communities, but I don't have money for it. I don't have money for salary or benefits or anything like that. It's just the two of us, and that's all we have at this moment. But I can't in good conscience offer these communities an unpaid internship when they frequently are unable to take them because they have to pay for food. So have you run into that? Are there ways to collaborate around that you can think of?
Yeah, are there any other community organizations that are doing any kinds of internship programs that you could potentially partner with to kind of share resources?
Yeah, I've tried. The issue is that the most likely candidates are already so swamped that, just getting them to have the bandwidth to have the conversation can be hard. And that's not trying to say anything bad. They're doing amazing work and everybody is short-staffed, and that's pretty much why.
Yeah, because part of our program is kind of what you're struggling with right now is, hiring somebody for a year is that's a long time, right? And that's a pretty expensive program. But we had other organizations come in to kind of share some of that financial load. And then they wouldn't just spend time within our organization, they would actually spend time learning skills and knowledge and spending time at these other organizations. So they were getting like so many different like kinds of skill sets and were able to connect with different people. So yeah, I know it's especially right now, it's so hard with resources for nonprofits, but just kind of keeping that in mind for the future, like if there are other organizations that, a potential intern can spend time at different organizations and really kind of getting to know a different niche and different skills, and it can work really well. And I think funders love to see that because they see, oh wow, like there's different organizations that are collaborating, and these youth or young adults get to spend time with different organizations and learning kind of a different professional skill set. And that was a big one for us for finding some larger funding. So it was really successful. We were able to get some larger foundations for like a few $100,000 to kind of keep that program. But it was because of that and the partnerships and spending time with different organizations, because it showed that the organizations were invested as a whole, which I think is really important. But yeah.
Shelley, I wonder also, since you're in the neighborhood, so to speak. I like what Kurt said on AmeriCorps, but I also wonder about the community colleges, like thinking outside of the environmental space and thinking about the workforce. Community colleges, they do have a foundation, Helios, because what you're doing is, like you said, workforce development. And there's a lot of workforce development and dollars in other buckets that might be helpful. And I wanted to say something on her questioning, connecting it back to something you said, Renee, about, oh my gosh, I took notes, maintaining engagement, but also like building it within the infrastructure. And so when she was asking about turnover, the idea of building and sustain, like being purposeful in your conversation and building a collaboration, and that you're building sustainability within it as you're shaping it. So you have that conversation about how do we sustain this organization, knowing that oftentimes there is turnover that occurs. And so that's another thing that you made me think about like literally being purposeful around that. And Betty, before I have you ask your question and before we wrap, I want to make sure that we hear something from Tim, because I'm going to put you on the spot, but he did pull off the Pentium chip process. So he's a process guy. He wrote a book about it. He trains about it. So I think it might be interesting to come back to Tim for a thought at the end after Betty, and then we'll wrap with final thoughts from Renee. Betty?
There we go. Hi. I wonder if there isn't, what we're talking about is a coalition, as near as I can tell, of climate nonprofits or climate groups all across the board. Is there any group right now that is trying to put a coalition together, and who would that be? I mean, I know we are, I can hear that, but if we need to speak with one voice somewhere where we can say, okay, we've got an event where all the groups need to come together, or we need to focus on this. There's so many different climate groups, and it's wonderful that there are, but we need to speak with one voice. I totally get that, and I have been, that's my incentive underneath all this, is to be able to speak with one voice. Secondly, I wanted to say, I'm retired, but when I worked, one of the things I did was establish public Montessori schools. And I had the good fortune to meet Nancy Rambush and spend some time with her. And what she told us about, Nancy Rambush brought Montessori to the United States in the 1930s. And what she told us about public Montessori schools is you've got to write policy. You must write policy. And so we did. The first one that we had, which was very small, which has grown a lot since then in Arizona, we wrote policy. And you know what? We have the largest school district in Arizona that listened to the policy and have honored it now for 30 years. So the policy stayed. The teachers have changed and retired, but the policy was there. And they knew that we agreed as a group on the policy and they honored it. So I'm just saying, yeah, the recipe, the policy is really important.
Thanks, Betty. Renee, did you have a thought or?
No, it just reminded me of something, Betty, that you said that we learned numerous years ago when we were kind of doing all this work that, yeah, having process is really important. You know, it has to be written down. You have to have structure around partnerships. And I mean, even with our collaborative, like we had an MOU that partners agreed that this is how we were going to do things. And even with our workforce development program, you know, we had a partnership agreement with the different organizations that we were working with, because I think it's really important to kind of line out the roles and responsibilities and accountability, because even though it's like building these relationships, it's that that, you know, empathy and like, you know, kind of human connection, but it's also, it has to work. So you need structure around it. And I think making sure that those roles and responsibilities are clearly defined on paper and you do have a partnership agreement that people are actually committed and they're not afraid to put that on paper, I think is really important. It just made me think of that, Betty, because it's, you got to have structure around the partnerships as well, or they won't work or last.
Yeah. Betty, part of what Earth Gives is trying to do is to build that ecosystem of environmental and climate focused nonprofits, not just in Arizona, but across the entire United States, because you know, when we discovered that only 2% of philanthropy goes to environmental work and only 0.5% for climate justice, we knew that there was an opportunity to build a giving day. And I know Barb and Kurt were frustrated about Giving Tuesday, and that is what happens. And yet the statistics show that when you're part of something bigger, you join and you create that. So what we're trying to do is not just do a transactional giving day, we're trying to build community. So this is part of it. We also have a women's thing. We've also done, as you well know, we did a power hour. One of our power hours featured Bill McKibben, who founded Third Act. So that intersection of storytelling, knowledge, collaboration, giving shout outs. And as I've said to a few people, because the way giving days work is they're powered kind of, well, part of the incentive is a prize fund. And we've had some generous donors to prize funds, but the more we grow it, the more nonprofits will engage. To me, a measure of success might be to have a prize fund that rewards collaboration, giving nonprofits, giving shout outs to one another and working together through the 25 days of giving. That would be a dream. And so to Renee's point about why we do this and what is our intent and being true to the intent. So how do we keep building the idea or integrating the idea of collaboration and community building? And so the one voice, so this then gets to the one voice, and then I'll maybe pass it to Tim for his thoughts, and then we can wrap it up and just allow David to ask some questions, is that there is no one voice. We have often said we're agnostic to the mission, but embracing of the collective. So when I had the good opportunity to go to South by Southwest earlier this year and did the climate track, there were many ocean science sort of breakouts that I went to, and they all said this term: there is no silver bullet, there's only silver buckshot. It is the many solutions that have to come together. So the voice of we must become earth givers together will drive the solution. So Third Act does what it does, and Reap Goodness does what it does, and it all sort of creates this quilt of solutions. So that's my answer. But anyway, Tim, do you have thoughts on systems collaboration from your work experience?
Actually, I also have one thought that I'd like to run by Renee, but in regards to, from my past experience, things that might help that I don't think I heard talked about today. One thing that we found very valuable when we had a big project that was going to require interdependency with a lot of outside groups. So I was doing this at Intel, and we might have various suppliers and contractors, and they were integral to the work we were doing. We would bring them into the planning meetings, all of them at the same time, right? So different partners would hear we'd get to say what their role is, and they'd hear the roles of the other partners, and kind of making one team out of this disparate group of contractors and people working together. And I'm trying to apply what I'm learning today, not so much at the organizational level, because that's Carol's responsibility, but on the project that I'm working on. And one small challenge is, as we've been getting the word out and trying to recruit people on our agroforest project, half the people we talk to say, oh, well, I don't have time to do that, but I know this organization, and you should talk to them, and they might want to get involved. And we have a lot of organizations doing similar things that would like to share what they're doing and see what we're doing. We've got more opportunities for partnership than we have members of our team. And something you were saying gave me this thought, and I just want to see if you think it makes any sense. It seems to me, as the team comes together, it might be helpful for us to think about what is some partnership help we really need? What are the roles we really need from outside partners? And then when we talk to these outside partners, say, here's what we're looking for. Is that something you guys could help us with? Would that be a way to kind of find the ones that really have something to contribute to us, and maybe vice versa?
I love that you said that, Tim, because I think that's a really important piece of this. I call it identifying the gaps. Because you do, have so much overlap sometimes with other partners, and you similar missions, or you have similar values, and you're kind of doing very similar things, but you need this over here, right? And so I think it's a great opportunity for the organization to kind of take a really deep dive and say, what are the gaps that we have, and what is it that we actually need, and what does that look like, and are there partners that would kind of complement that and fill that gap? Because that's how I see it, is, hey, we do this really well, but we don't have this, but that partner does that extremely well, and that's the kind of the missing piece, and there's that gap. And then those are the partners that we bring on board, and also help each other to build capacity to do what we do well, and do it at an even kind of broader level, right? And so I think that's a really great point, because I think it's like putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Like, what is the need, and who fills what role, and making sure that all the gaps are filled with the specific needs. So that's a really great point, Tim. And I think, yeah, each organization has to do that internally, go through that exercise, because I think it is really important.
Is it like a mini job description?
Yeah, so for us in our partnership agreements, it actually identifies roles and responsibilities of what specifically each partner does, because you want to also remain clear of like what a partner has agreed as far as the partnerships that they're going to provide, and you have to also hold partners accountable, right? So yeah, I mean, it's written down and it's lined out, like, here are the needs, here's the partner, and this is kind of their role and responsibility, and this is what they're going to bring to the partnership, and they're going to provide. So yeah, I think being very, very clear is super important, but then also somebody that's keeping folks on task and keeping eye on the prize, keeping people in track and online, to be like, hey, let's not get off, this track here, or like we go down these little side roads, and like, oh, it's like the shiny penny, right? Which organizations sometimes tend to do. You need somebody that's going to keep the different organizations focused on what kind of like their role is. to be really effective and successful, because it's easy to like see the shiny penny and be like, we could do this. It's like, no, stay focused. So keeping focused on what the needs are, I think is really important too, and having somebody that can do that, because we all want to do good stuff.
And thanks for joining as our community comments impact makers. Renee, you gave us a lot of food for thought, and I think we're all walking away with some actionable items.
Thank you for having me. And it was great to, thanks for all the great questions and all that you had to share. And, if anyone wants to connect with me or kind of talk about these things on the side, please feel free to connect with me and email. I always love talking about this kind of work and sharing ideas and learning from you all as well. So feel free to reach out.